So the first question is, how did you become a non-feminist woman?
Um, I think it was kind of like a slow, like drip, drip, drip type of thing until all of a sudden it was like over for me. I
Hmm.
was I was pretty extreme in my feminist ideas,
Hmm.
and I would say there were a couple of things that happened like back to back. I got married. I moved outside of the United States. Um, and then I had children.
Okay.
So all of those things kind of happened right in the same year
Hmm.
um, for me, and together it just with what the feminist what the feminists were saying, what the
Yeah.
feminist ideas of the time are, it just was not gonna fit together with the other things that were being revealed to me by moving outside of the United States, by having children, and by marrying somebody. Also, who I married was he was undocumented,
Hmm.
and so that's we he was deported, and that's how we moved out of the United States. So it was just so many layers to
Hmm.
what was happening.
Okay. Um, and okay. Do you think that in the West we live in a patriarchy, or
I
what is
definitely
your
thought that.
yeah? What is your view on patriarchy?
I don't think so. No,
Okay. Yeah.
I think that we live. There are. I think we definitely have power structures, but they have more to do with money
Okay.
than
Then gender.
there's.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. What is your view on traditional gender roles?
Mm, I really don't. I was always very I was kind of tomboyish growing up. I
Hmm.
cut my hair super short, and I
Hmm.
would wear like I would dress like Hot Topic was very big when I was younger. I don't know if you know that store.
Hmm.
Um, but I was kind of alternative, and I always was like pushing the boundaries. I was called dyke in high school, things like that a
Hmm.
lot. And I always was like, it didn't bother me. I
Hmm.
was like, it doesn't matter. Like, anybody can wear anything. Anybody
Right.
can wear any hairstyle, right? Um, so that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
I don't care about. I don't think that matters.
Yeah.
However, I do, just because we can all dress or wear or do our hair however we want, I don't think that means that we can change our actual biological sex.
Hmm.
And that was one of the main reasons for
Hmm.
me leaving feminism. I was like, this is the fact that we're trying to say that men can just say that they're women is insane, and I'm done with this.
Okay. Okay. What is your take on intersectionality?
Oh gosh. I used to have that in my Tinder bio. I used to say I was an intersectional feminist.
Hmm.
That's so funny. I used to really buy into it. Um, but now that, oh my gosh, my children are mixed race,
Hmm.
and I used to really believe in how important it was to like consider, how would I word this? I guess I could say now that I have my children,
Hmm.
that I believe that the message, I don't like the message to them that because they're brown, that
They're
they
disadvantaged.
are have less power,
Hmm.
or that because they're brown they're not worth as much,
Hmm.
or that they're gonna have. I don't believe in that message anymore. I think it's really disempowering to black and brown people, um,
I
and
think
I think
it's
that
also more complex than that. It's also, of
it's
course, more complex than that. As in,
it's more
it's
complex.
yeah.
Hmm.
There are, of course, black children who grew up with everything and have good support systems, or have money, or have whatever it is you need to thrive, and of course they would thrive. But if I think, yeah, it can be that um, it's not so easy to define the things that disadvantage us in life. it could be very simple things, or it could be, yeah.
I
Okay.
agree. I agree. And then I also didn't want my children feeling like they have half of them that's evil, like white people, and like
Okay.
oppressive white people, and then the other half of them is poor, oppressed, like,
Yeah.
you know, brown people. And I think these are complicated conversations that
Yeah.
could be appropriate for adults to have conversations about it, but I don't
Hmm.
think it's appropriate to talk to this stuff to
It's quite
kids. I
complex.
guess that's a
For
tangent. You
me,
didn't ask about that, but
intersectionality was also actually quite a big thing because I was an anti-feminist as soon as I heard of feminism. To be honest, I was never a feminist.
mm,
But at some point in my journey of anti-feminism, when I encountered intersectionality, it sort of made me stop. And then I was like, okay, well, I see what they're saying here. This sort of makes sense. Um, so what do I do with that? But then it's sort of then, yeah, it's more complex, and it's not just a matter of it being more complex. It's more like, how do I put it? I do agree that different groups of people have issues. Like, I can agree that Black people share issues, LGBT people share issues, and so on and so on. But I don't think that women are one of those groups in that way. Like, yes, women have specific issues, but then men have specific issues as well. So of course we can say that each gender has specific issues, but I can't actually say that women are so disadvantaged in the same way as other historical groups. You know what I mean? Because I think, like, okay, this and this group didn't have equality for whatever reason, whatever. But with women and men, the reasons that they didn't have equality, actually, it comes from biology and history, and like, it's super complex why women and men haven't had equality. It's never been, oh my god, society hated women. So I
mhm,
feel like
mhm.
it's kind of unfair of feminists to, like, just go on about equality, 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 and make it seem like if society was just mean to women, and then they use intersectionality to say, hey, we're just good people because we want equality for Black people, equality for gay people. Yeah, like, everybody wants equality for these people. It has nothing to do with feminism. And with women, yeah, I mean, you don't have equality, but neither do men. It wasn't meanness. It was, it
I
was,
agree.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I agree, and I actually think that I think a lot it ends up with all these white women trying to be like almost like
oh
trying
yeah.
to.
When they take it too far, that's another thing. Like,
It's
okay,
just
yes,
weird to
yes,
me.
okay. If I was at the point where I was like, okay, intersectionality, this is a thing. I see what they're going with. But then when you enter feminist groups and they're like, oh, this day is for people of color to speak, and no one else can, and and
I agree.
oh, you have to VMO people of color, and it's like, what is this? It looks like a cult, like, you know. It's like a
Absolutely,
cult.
absolutely, and
Yeah.
I really actually believed that though. I really believed that for a
Hmm.
long time. I did.
Yeah.
And then I was like, why am I buying into a religion basically where I agree to silence myself? Why
Yeah.
am I agreeing
And
that I shouldn't
what
be
do
allowed to
you
talk?
personally have to do with whiteness, in a sense? Whatever happened, like, this has nothing to do with you. This is something that happened historically, and I mean, it doesn't have to do with you personally. You know what I mean?
I
Like,
think that's the point though,
yeah.
because since it has nothing to do with me or other current modern day white women personally, therefore it will never end. They can continue to keep this going because there's never
And it
anything that
also
we
has
can do.
nothing to do with me. I mean,
Right.
I'm from the Caribbean, so my ancestors were slaves in the Caribbean, not in the U.S. But yeah, I mean, the fact that my ancestors were slaves, I mean, what, you understand? It,
Mhm.
yes, of course, it impacted our lives in some way, da, 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 but it's not. How is that something to do with me? It's really strange. But
Right.
I understand it. I understand intersectionality. I have sympathy for the idea. I'm not sure that it can be applied to women at all.
Mm-hmm.
I could
Yeah.
understand that it can be applied to actually disadvantaged groups, and the disadvantaged groups I'm talking about would be like disabled people,
Mm-hmm.
people who come from really poor environments, maybe immigrants. I don't know exactly. I'm not going to try to define, but I can understand the idea that people who immigrate all have similar problems that seem to be unseen by the rest of society. People who are disabled, people who are go on and
I
on.
think
Yeah.
that there is, see, it's like you start with a kernel of truth or like an important idea, something that we
Yeah.
should discuss, something we should care about, and then they develop it into this doctrine where
Right.
no one's allowed to question, no one's allowed to
And
have a
they use
discussion,
it
no
when
one's
it
allowed to
shouldn't be
talk.
used, and they use
Mhm.
it in places where it's not relevant. So to
Mhm.
bring it into feminism and use other people's issues to say that this is relevant to women. Women exist throughout all of society, from rich to poor. We do not share issues in that way, although yes we do, but it is not in the way to
It's a
say
different way.
it's
It's a
a
very
different
different
way.
way.
It's not to say that society hates women. No, it's just that
Mhm.
biology, history happened, we had children, and therefore we developed traditions around that, and now we don't have these issues, so we're going to change them. Okay, but let's
Right.
change them in a happy way that's
Well, men,
constructive. you know
right, right. And men and women as long as there's human beings, there's men and women,
right.
right? There's the two genders or the two sexes. But that is not the same for race. For most of history, human history, like white people were over in Europe where they were,
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
Asians were over in Asia, and like there wasn't a whole lot of like
No,
that wasn't
tribalism is
apart.
totally different than sexism.
Yeah,
Sexism, the root of sexism was survival. Of course, tribalism as well. But these are two total different things. It's just
hmm
they are really different. Um, all of the issues, and I understand wanting to solve the issues, but it's like also while women had it bad, men had it bad. So we cannot say that this is equality and it's just women. I think
yeah, I
there's
agree. I agree.
yeah.
Yeah. hmm
But that was
Yeah.
something that did stop me with feminism was the intersectionality thing. But then I don't agree with it now. In a sense, I don't disagree with it. I actually agree with it. I just think that there are issues with it that are not explored. And of course, if they take it to the weird extent where they're like, oh my god, you have to pay black people, or oh my gosh, you have to like listen to them, and this is just weird. I don't agree with that. That is
I think
just
that's, yeah, I think
now.
that's the problem. I think it's creating more division against people than it is. Like, it's important to examine the history of and the current situation
It's
and
important to
discrimination against
examine,
black people and
right,
brown people
or the
and
way
every group.
that groups face discrimination, whether it be
hmm
black or gay or even women and men, and every group. It is important to explore these things, so that's fine. We can explore the way every group feels, but you cannot use that to like say that therefore I'm special. That's the
Yeah,
point. You can't
yeah.
use that to say therefore I deserve this. It's like
Well, it's
no.
like saying I'm anti-racist. So if you disagree with anything I say, then you are racist. Like that
Mhm.
doesn't. You don't get to just claim that. You don't get to decide that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
I mean, and I feel like yeah. I mean, a group is disadvantaged. That is true. There are many groups of people within society who are disadvantaged, and one major disadvantaged group it would have been people who are poor. That's also why
hmm
you have a lot of far right people who call intersectionality what they call it cultural Marxism, because they think that
Mm,
like eventually it's going to just come to a point where they say, okay, let's all be communist, because the
mm-hmm.
most disadvantaged group is always going to be the poorest group, right?
Yeah.
um so
Mhm.
so yeah, but I think we can explore that, how people are disadvantaged, but we cannot just take it to an extreme extent and say, okay, well, therefore, I give me all your money, I deserve to speak, I like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because then
I
then
agree.
then you end up with a culture where everybody's like, oh my gosh, I've been raped and I'm gay, and not so bad, but you know what I mean. Then you end up
Yeah. Yeah.
with a sort of like, you are rewarding disadvantages. So what? Now everybody's
Yes.
gonna be disadvantaged because
And
you know
yeah, I think it's also not healthy for the individual to label ourselves by everything that we.
yeah,
Then
not
it's like
not
you're.
so heavily. You don't need to heavily rely on these things. These things
And
are a
also,
part of you, but it's okay.
that's one reason I don't like it though, because if you're starting to say then talk about brown, like I said, my daughters are brown. So if we're just going to say use this label to as a synonym for disadvantaged,
Hmm.
I don't want my daughters to think of their brownness as nothing but a disadvantage. Their brownness is what one of the many things that makes them special, which makes them unique, their cultural heritage, the country that they come from. You know, they're Mexican. So that is not something that should only be seen as a disadvantage.
Hmm.
They should be proud of these things,
Hmm.
right? As a part of many things of who they are. So my life is so bad because this. My life is so bad because this. My life is so bad because this. Like, no, these aren't bad things. You know, they had. We can definitely examine how there are some aspects of disadvantage because of that,
Yeah.
but they're not. Doesn't mean they're inherently bad
Right. And
things. They're.
also, you can't like flip something like race or so on, and then it becomes like, yeah, it was something bad, but now this is my, like, this is my crutch to, I don't know. I feel like you shouldn't use your race in this way.
Mhm.
I'm talking about when, as you say, like in the groups where they say, like, now it's the turn for these people to speak and no one else can speak. Or, it's just, I don't know, it just seems a bit abusive or something. It's very weird.
Yeah.
You can,
And life is.
and like, how your race is something that, like, no one had control over this. So how can you use this, you know?
Mhm.
It is.
Yeah, and it's so much more nuanced. There's so many layers. There's just more to it. We can't just
Yeah,
be.
I can't. Yeah, it's so much more nuanced. Disadvantage in life is complex. It is. It
Yeah.
cannot. For each person, it's going to be different. The things that disadvantage me, whether or not I am disabled, or I'm not disabled, but whether or not I am this or that or whatever, you're not going to be able to tell what is my, what are the things that most disadvantage me.
Exactly, because there are certain um I have a lot of black friends,
Mhm,
and to some of them, they have experienced some really shitty, like racist events or
mhm,
in their life,
mhm,
and then some of them haven't experienced maybe but one or two small things.
mhm,
So you can't. So for what one person has been,
mhm.
something that they
And
have
it
struggled
might
with
be,
a lot.
like, they also include trauma, like rape and stuff like this. Like, you're not going to be able to tell the impact of this or that. It might be what disadvantage you most might be that you had a mother who was on drugs, right? Who knows? Like, this is not
That's a
something.
big one. That's a
Yeah,
big one.
this
Absolutely.
might
And you
be.
will never see that. You will never, from looking at a person, you will never know, oh, their mother was on drugs and was like abandoning or neglectful.
Right.
You can never tell from looking at a person. And that's probably one of the worst things that can happen to somebody
Hmm.
is to have a neglectful,
Exactly. And in
um,
our society today, one of the worst, I mean, not just in our society, but let's say globally in our world, quite a big disadvantage would be wealth. Um, what can we do about that? What are we going to do? Yes, I agree that we can look at these things, but I'm just saying it is not so easy to deal with these problems, and just going around in groups and saying, you talk first, you have more importance, you're the ultimate victim because you, this is just, no. It
And
doesn't.
then you can, if you let it define you, then how will you ever overcome it? You know, if it becomes your identity, then you're
But
never
I think
allowed to
even,
change your
I
identity.
think it becomes more of your identity when that happens, when people focus on it and
Exactly.
think. It becomes more.
Exactly.
Because, yeah, I feel like you can be a black person and just be okay with being black, and that's it. I mean, I have experienced racism in my life a few times. Today I actually I was speaking to some people and we spoke about that. So I recall the, times when I've experienced racism. Yeah, but I don't think it needs to define you. I think it's just a thing. It just as sometimes it depends. I mean, it depends on how you experience things or whatever. Maybe for some people it would be a big problem, but for others it wouldn't. You know,
Yeah, there's a
it depends
woman.
on
Oh,
when
what
it
is her
happens, I
name?
guess, or how it happens, or I don't know.
Yeah,
You know,
there's a woman, and I cannot remember her name right now, but she wrote a book, and she's talking about a lot about all these different groups of people who have been through all kinds of trauma.
hmm
And what the studies are showing is that just because you had the trauma, one example was like child abuse,
right,
that was less a predictor of the outcome as to how the person thought about what they went through and how they
right.
dealt with it, and
Yeah,
whether they decided it became part of who they are. Oh, I'm a
right.
victim of child abuse,
Yes,
and carry that their whole
that's
life.
what I think as well. Because I mean, I was gonna say something about sexual assault, but I felt bad. I mean, sexual assault is awful, terrible, bad, but it it is going to affect different people in different ways, and although it's terrible and bad, and we have to deal with it, and you need therapy, and all these things have to happen. I agree, right? But when you enter a group of people that tells you you being raped is, I'm going to reward you by calling you a victim and letting you
Hmm.
speak and giving you privileges above other people just because you have had the disadvantage of being raped, then that trauma becomes a bigger part of you than it was. And I
That's what
am
the.
not sure
Hmm.
it needs to be. And it's similar with race. I am not sure that race needs to be as big a part of somebody as people
As we're
make it
making
out
it,
to
and
be.
yeah.
It doesn't need to be that big a part of somebody. And sexual abuse, it will always be a part of you. I understand this, da, da, da. But you don't need to like focus on it so much and like be in groups. But you do in a constructive way, maybe with a therapist alone, in in this
Yeah,
way, but not in this public way of, oh my gosh, this makes me a victim and
and
therefore I
on and on
deserve.
and on.
Yeah.
That's what I was, the same lady I was just talking to you about. One of the studies she mentioned was they studied people who went to like cancer survivor groups and sexual assault survivor groups, and a couple other ones I don't remember. But the people who went to the groups, um, on average, were worse off. They were more depressed. They
Yeah.
were, because they had continued to dwell in that
Focus
instead
on
of
it.
kind
Yeah.
of trying to move on from it.
Right, and I
I
think
mean,
that is really happening with race. I can think because I think race can be just it can be something very small. Yes, yes, society might sometimes discriminate against you, but half the time you're not even gonna know. How are you gonna know if somebody's discriminating against you? You're not gonna know.
right.
So it may not even affect your world. Just
I
but
agree.
focusing on it so much, and like this sort of weird cult groups things that I have seen, weird. Weird.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm really glad I kind
Yeah,
of woke up from the woke, I
yeah,
guess you could
yeah.
say.
Okay, so what is your take on hypergamy? Have you ever heard of it? Hypergamy.
Is that where women date multiple men?
It's where women choose, well, this is like a theory from the manosphere that women choose men based on their social status and like wealth, or like women date up
Right.
basically. Do you think this is a thing? Do women do this? Is it something or not? Or
I think it I think that women I think historically women have.
Mm-hmm.
I think the average woman, there are people obviously on the extremes,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the average woman today
Mm-hmm.
is settling for
Whoever she gets, that is nice, I
is
guess.
settling is settling. I mean, the numbers show that there's not that. I mean, as the in the United States, the wages have been suppressed. Men are not making as much as women, and
Right.
people are still dating. People
Right.
are still in relationships.
Okay.
So it just has to be the case. There are so many relationships now where the men stay home and the
Right.
women are the breadwinners. So
Right.
it can't be true that everyone's doing that. However, there are definitely some people that are doing that to the extreme. But and I used to always think, oh, just like find somebody for love.
Yeah.
Until I had children and I realized how great the burden of childbearing is, and I will give different advice to my daughters.
Okay.
Like I will
Okay.
tell them to make sure you pick somebody who can don't plan to be working all the time. You don't want to work 9 months through a pregnancy. You don't want to go to work 2 weeks, a month, even 6 months after your baby is born.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have to do that. I mean, you don't want to leave your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And those are things that I didn't realize the amount of hours breastfeeding took. It's
Mm.
freaking insane. I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea. I just
Mm-hmm.
thought you just feed the baby. Like, I just was very disconnected
Yeah,
from that.
I think we
Um,
are disconnected as a society from how much it takes to raise a child properly. You know, yeah, breastfeeding is a wonderful thing, but like there's so much science involved in it as well and stuff like that. Like
insane.
sleeping closer
Insane.
to your child, it helps, to and so on and so on. Maybe you have to wake up in the night. It's very complicated, but none of this is really spoken about in greater society. It's only when you become a mother that you hear everything.
I had
Yeah,
no idea,
yeah.
and I think the fact that we're having less and less children,
Mm-hmm.
in American society, and well, globally as well,
Mm-hmm.
we aren't exposed to that. Like I didn't have cousins who had children.
Mm-hmm.
My brother didn't start having kids. I have two brothers. One of them started having kids like just a year before I did. So I wasn't around that enough to my friends. I had no friends that had had kids yet. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had no exposure besides through media
Mm-hmm.
to what that was like, and so it really
Mm-hmm.
hit me in a big way. But yeah, so I think women should be looking. You don't have to look for like the king,
Yeah.
whatever, but like they should be looking for somebody that's gonna, if they want to have children,
Yeah.
they should be looking for somebody that's going to be able to provide for the family in at least the
And that is
basics.
okay with it, basically. Someone who wants to, because you don't want to be in a situation where the guy doesn't want to. That would be the worst, I think. I
Oh
think
no, of
even if,
course not.
yeah, because I mean, yeah, they have to want to, yeah.
Yes, of course,
Yeah.
yeah. And then it's more complicated because I mean, that just it gets very complicated because then if you are a woman and you're married with children and you have no source of economic,
Oh yeah, yeah,
if
yeah,
you have no
yeah, yeah,
source of
yeah.
money, then you
No,
can
but
kind of
not
be
no
trapped. And
source. I think women can still work part time. Well, in my view, I feel like women can still like keep one foot in the door, work a bit. But the point is, it's good to have that option to be with your kids, basically.
I agree.
And
I
yeah,
agree.